My name is Ethan Cole, and the last thing my parents ever said to me before I left was this: don't come home. Your sister doesn't want you there. Not will miss you. Not take care of yourself. Not even a goodbye hug. Just that. 7 words. And I carried those 7 words with me for 6 years. 6 years of silence. 6 years of building something from nothing. 6 years of wondering what I did wrong. Why I wasn't enough. Why the family I grew up in felt like a door that was always slightly closed, until the day they finally locked it in my face and told me not to knock again. But here's what they didn't know. Here's what nobody knew. The day they told me not to come home was the day everything started. And the day they showed up at my wedding, uninvited, was the day it all came full circle. This is my story, and I need you to hear all of it. I grew up in a house that looked fine from the outside. Nice neighborhood, clean lawn, 2-car garage. My dad worked in sales. My mom stayed home. We had a dog named Rusty and a trampoline in the backyard, and the kind of house that neighbors would compliment when they walked by. But houses can lie. I learned that young. My sister Natalie was 3 years older than me. And from the moment I was old enough to understand the way a room worked, I understood one thing clearly. Natalie was the sun, and I was just a planet orbiting around her. She was everything my parents wanted. Bright, charismatic, beautiful in the way that made adults lean down and say, oh, she's going to be something special. She danced. She won awards. She brought home trophies that lined the mantel above the fireplace, while my report cards got a glance and a nod. I was a good student too. Quietly good. The kind of good that doesn't make noise. And in my family, if you didn't make noise, you didn't get noticed. I remember being 10 years old and finishing a science project I'd worked on for 3 weeks. A model of the solar system. Hand-painted planets. Real measurements. A little lead sun in the center that actually lit up. My teacher gave me the highest grade in the class. I brought it home, bursting with pride. My mom was on the phone. She waved at me without looking. My dad was watching TV. He said, "That's good, bud," and turned back to the screen. That night, Natalie came home from dance practice with a second-place ribbon, and my parents took her out for ice cream to celebrate. I stayed home. I told myself it didn't matter. I was 10. I didn't have the words for what I felt. By the time I was 15, I had the words. I just stopped saying them because nobody was listening. Things shifted when I started high school. I'd always been quiet, but I found something that made me come alive. Business. Sounds weird for a teenager, I know. But there was this elective class in 9th grade called Introduction to Entrepreneurship, and something just clicked. The way systems worked. The way value was created. The way a good idea, executed well, could change things. I started small, bought and flipped sneakers online, made a few $100s, reinvested it, built a little online resale operation that by junior year was making me around $800 a month. I didn't tell my parents, not because I was hiding it, but because I knew what would happen. They would tell Natalie, and Natalie would find a way to make it about her. She always did. The summer before my senior year, I'd saved nearly $12,000. I had a plan. I wanted to use part of it to apply to a business program at a university 3 states away. Full application. Scholarship eligible. The program had produced some of the most successful young entrepreneurs in the country. I told my parents at dinner one night. My mom blinked. That's very far away. My dad said, "How are you going to pay for it?" I told them I'd saved money. Told them about the resale business. Told them I had $12,000 and a scholarship application already drafted. My dad looked at me like I'd just told him I was moving to the moon. My mom said, "But what about Natalie's recital tour? We're going to be very busy this year with her schedule." I remember the silence that followed that sentence. I remember the way my fork felt cold in my hand. "I know," I said quietly, "but this is about me." My dad cleared his throat. "We're not saying don't do it. We're just saying the timing is complicated." The timing was always complicated. Natalie's school play, Natalie's competitions, Natalie's college applications, Natalie's boyfriend drama that somehow required both my parents' full emotional attention for 3 months straight. I applied to the program on my own. Didn't ask for help. Wrote every essay myself. Sent in the application with my own money and a prayer. 3 months later, I got in. Full acceptance. Partial scholarship. Enough that, combined with my savings, I could make it work. I told my parents. My mom said, "Oh, that's wonderful, honey." And then she asked Natalie to pass the salad. College was where I found myself. For the first time in my life, I was in a room where ambition wasn't a personality flaw. Where people talked about ideas at 2 a.m, not because they had to, but because they couldn't stop. Where nobody knew my sister's name and nobody cared about her ribbon collection. I was just Ethan. Ethan, who worked harder than almost anyone. Ethan, who slept 4 hours a night his freshman year, not because he was reckless, but because he was hungry. Ethan, who found a co-founder named Marcus in his second semester. A guy from Chicago with a software background and a laugh that could fill a gymnasium. And together, the two of them started building something real. It was a platform, a simple concept at the time, connecting small local businesses with micro-influencers in their area, before that kind of marketing became mainstream. Before the big companies figured out what we already knew. We called it Groundswell. We ran it out of a dorm room. By junior year, we had 40 clients. By senior year, we had 212. I called home maybe once a month. The conversations were always the same. My mom would tell me about Natalie. My dad would ask if I was keeping up with my studies. Nobody asked about the business. Nobody asked about my life, really. They asked surface questions and gave surface answers, and we all pretended it was enough. The call I remember most happened the spring of my senior year. I'd just closed our first real investor round. Small by industry standards, $250,000, but enormous to me. It meant Groundswell was real. It meant we were going to graduate and keep going instead of shutting it down and getting jobs. I called home to share the news. My mom answered. I told her. I could hear the TV in the background. "That's nice," she said. "Oh, Ethan, speaking of, I need to talk to you about something. Natalie is getting married." I blinked. "Oh. Wow. When did this happen?" "Last weekend. He proposed at the restaurant we love. It was beautiful." She cried. We all cried. "That's great, Mom. The wedding is in December. We're thinking 150 people. Maybe more." "Okay. We'll need you to come home this summer to help with planning. Your father and I are funding most of it, and there's a lot to coordinate." Something inside me went very still. "Mom," I said slowly, "I just told you I closed a $250,000 investment round." A pause. "Yes, you did say that. You didn't even ask what that means." Another pause. Longer. "Ethan, I'm sure it's very exciting. I have a lot on my mind right now with the wedding." I sat on the edge of my dorm bed for a long time after that call ended, and I made a decision. I was done waiting to matter. I graduated in May and moved straight to San Francisco with Marcus. We took a small office space that smelled like someone had left coffee out for a week, and we worked like the building was on fire. I did not go home that summer to help plan Natalie's wedding. I sent a card. A gift off the registry. A polite message saying I couldn't get away. The response from my mother was 2 sentences. "Your sister is very hurt. I hope you know what you're doing to this family." I put my phone face down and kept working. The wedding happened in December without me. I sent another gift. No response that time. And then, 3 months after the wedding, I got a call from my dad. His voice was different. Harder. Like he'd been rehearsing. He said, "Your sister told us what you said to her." I went very still. What I said to her? Dad, I haven't spoken to Natalie in months. She said you called her selfish. That you said her wedding was a joke. That you're embarrassed by this family. My mouth went dry. Dad, that's not true. I never said any of that. Ethan, why would she make that up? I don't know. But I'm telling you, I never said any of those things. I've barely spoken to her since last year. A long silence. And then, she doesn't want you coming home. And honestly, after everything, your mother and I think it's best if you give her some space. Give her some space? My voice cracked. Dad, she's lying to you. I don't appreciate you calling your sister a liar. Then what do you want me to say? His voice got very quiet, very flat. Don't come home, Ethan. Your sister doesn't want you there. The line went dead. And just like that, I was out. Not asked, not given a chance to explain, not told we'll talk more when things calm down. Just removed from the family like a name crossed off a list. I sat in my San Francisco apartment for a long time that night, staring at the wall. I was 23 years old and completely alone. Here's what they didn't know was happening on the other side of that silence. Groundswell was growing. Quietly at first. Then faster. Then like a fire that catches wind. By the time I was 25, we had over 2,000 business clients and a team of 30 people. We'd expanded from local influencer marketing into a full-service digital community platform. We had offices in 2 cities and a third in the works. Marcus and I barely slept. We barely did anything except work, and occasionally remind each other to eat. We had a shared vision and a shared stubbornness and a mutual refusal to slow down. I also had, for the first time in my life, a circle of people who genuinely saw me. There was Priya, our head of operations, who could solve problems faster than most people could identify them, and who made the best chai I'd ever tasted, and who once drove 45 minutes to bring me soup when I had a fever and refused to leave the office. There was James, our lead developer, who was quiet and brilliant and loyal in the way very few people ever managed to be. And there was Claire. Claire came into my life at the exact moment I had stopped looking. We met at an industry event in the fall of my 25th year. She was a journalist covering tech startups, notebook in hand, asking sharp questions that made me actually think before I answered. She had dark eyes and a way of listening that made you feel like whatever you were saying was the only important thing in the room. We talked for 2 hours that first night. Not about business, about everything else. Books and cities and the specific kind of loneliness that comes from working so hard you forget to look up. About family, briefly, in the way you do when you're just starting to trust someone. Careful, but real. I told her I was estranged from my family. She didn't flinch. She didn't ask a dozen follow-up questions. She just said, "That must have cost you something," and looked at me like she already understood the bill. 2 years later, I asked her to marry me on a Tuesday morning in our kitchen over coffee, because that felt more like us than any restaurant ever could. She said yes before I finished the sentence. Planning our wedding was the first time in years I let myself feel the absence of my family like an open wound. We had friends. We had colleagues. We had Marcus and Priya and James and a whole table of people who had been built into our lives through shared work and shared belief. We had Claire's family, her parents, who were warm and funny and immediately made me feel like I had been their son-in-law for years. But I had no family of my own at the table. I had blocked my parents' numbers 2 years after the call, not out of spite, out of survival, out of self-preservation. Because every time I saw their names appear on my screen, something clenched in my chest that I couldn't afford, not then, when I was building something that required my full heart. I hadn't spoken to any of them in over 3 years. Claire knew everything. She knew every piece of the story. She'd held me through the harder nights. She never once pushed me to reconcile. But she also never let me pretend it didn't matter. 2 months before the wedding, she sat across from me at our kitchen table and said, "Are you sure you don't want to reach out? Even just to let them know?" I stared into my coffee cup. Why? So they cannot show up and I can feel it twice? She was quiet for a moment. Or so that you know you gave them the chance. I thought about it for a long time. In the end, I wrote a short letter. No anger, no blame, just the facts. The date, the venue, the time. A note that said I still had love for them even if our relationship had broken, that they were welcome if they wanted to come. I sent it to my childhood home address. I never heard back. I told myself I was at peace with it. Some days I even was. The wedding was scheduled for the first Saturday in June. And on the Friday night before, the night of our rehearsal dinner, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But something made me. It was Natalie. Her voice was strange, tight, like she was holding something back. "Ethan," she said. "It's me." The whole world seemed to stop for a second. "I know," I said. "I need to talk to you before tomorrow." My jaw tightened. "Natalie, it's the night before my wedding. Whatever you need to say." I lied. Silence. "What?" Her voice broke slightly. I lied. "About what I told Mom and Dad you said. All those years ago. I made it up. I was angry because you didn't come to my wedding and I don't know what I wanted. But it wasn't true. None of it was true. You never said any of those things. I made it up. And then it went too far. And I didn't know how to take it back, and I just... Natalie." My voice was very quiet. "Why are you telling me this now?" A pause, because Mom and Dad got your letter. The invitation. They want to come tomorrow. They've been talking about it for weeks. And I couldn't let them sit in that church without you knowing the truth. I couldn't let you stand there and think they just showed up because of your success, or because it was convenient. I needed you to know that She stopped. And then, "I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm really, really sorry." I stood in the parking lot of the rehearsal dinner venue for a long time after that call ended. The noise from inside floated out through the glass doors. Laughter. Music. Claire's mother telling a story that kept making everyone burst out loud. I stood in the dark, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not rage, not relief. Something more complicated. Something that had no clean name. I walked back inside. I found Claire at the end of the long table, mid-laugh, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up and she saw my face, and her smile shifted into something softer, more searching. Later that night, in the quiet of our hotel room, I told her everything Natalie had said. She sat across from me on the bed and didn't say a word until I was finished. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" I looked at her. I said slowly, "I want to find out if it's possible to grieve something and forgive it at the same time." She reached over and took my hand. "I think that's exactly what you're going to do tomorrow." I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the dark and I went back through every moment. The science project that no one celebrated. The dinner where I told them about my acceptance and they asked Natalie to pass the salad. The call where my dad's voice went flat and cold and he told me, without flinching, not to come home. I went back to my 10-year-old self in that kitchen with his hand-painted solar system. And I said to him, quietly, in the dark, "You deserved better. You always deserved better. And it wasn't your fault." Something loosened in my chest. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in years, I slept without tension in my shoulders. The morning of my wedding was golden. It was one of those early June days that feels like the world is doing you a favor. Soft light, warm air, the kind of sky that makes everything look slightly more beautiful than usual. The venue was a converted barn on the edge of a vineyard about an hour outside the city. All exposed wood beams and string lights and simple white flowers that Claire had spent 6 months carefully selecting. Marcus showed up at my door at 7 in the morning with coffee and a tie he'd already knotted incorrectly 3 times. "Tell me I look calm," he said. "You look like a man who hasn't slept. That's basically the same thing." He handed me the coffee. "You ready for this?" I looked in the mirror. Dark suit. Hair actually cooperating for once. The kind of face that knows it's standing at the edge of something. "Yeah," I said. "I think I actually am." I hadn't told Marcus about Natalie's call. I hadn't told anyone except Claire. I wasn't sure yet what today would bring, what arrival might be waiting at the end of that aisle, what faces I might see in the crowd. I had decided to let it unfold, and to feel it as it came instead of bracing for it in advance. The ceremony was set for 2 in the afternoon. I stood at the front of that barn at 1:59, and I looked out at the people gathered there. Our people. The ones we had chosen, and who had chosen us back. Marcus to my left, grinning like an idiot. Priya in the second row, already dabbing her eyes with a tissue she'd pre-positioned. James in the 4th row, ramrod straight, looking like he was attending a board meeting but with kind eyes. Claire's parents in the front, her mother gripping her husband's arm, and in the back row, on the left side of the aisle, my parents. And Natalie. I saw them the moment I looked toward the doors, and for one long second, the entire barn seemed to hold its breath. My mother looked older. My father had more gray. Natalie sat between them, and she wasn't looking at the ceiling or the flowers, or her phone. She was looking at me. And when our eyes met, she didn't look away. I held her gaze for just a moment, and then the music started, and I turned to face the doorway, and Claire appeared. In that white dress. With that smile. Walking toward me like she was the answer to a question I'd been asking my whole life without knowing the words for it. And I stopped thinking about anything else. The ceremony was perfect. Not perfect in the way that means flawless. Perfect in the way that means completely, undeniably real. We had written our own vows. Claire went first, and she spoke about choosing someone not just on the good days, but on the quiet, difficult ones. About how love isn't a feeling you wait for. It's a practice you return to, again and again, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Then it was my turn. I had written my vows weeks in advance. I had rehearsed them. I knew exactly what I was going to say. But standing there, in front of everyone I loved, with my family watching from the back row, I set aside the paper, and I spoke from memory, from somewhere deeper than prepared words. Claire, I said, I spent a long time thinking that love was something you earned, that you had to be enough, smart enough, successful enough, quiet enough, loud enough to deserve it. I spent years trying to figure out what I'd done wrong to make the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally put conditions on it anyway. The barn was completely silent. And then I met you, and you showed me something I hadn't let myself believe before. That love isn't a reward. It's a choice. And you choose it every day. Not because I'm perfect, not because I've figured everything out, but because you see me, the actual me, and you choose to stay. I felt my voice wanting to break. I steadied it. I choose you, Claire. Today. Tomorrow. On all the Tuesday mornings and hard Wednesdays and long nights and ordinary, beautiful, irreplaceable days in between. I choose you. and I'm never going to stop." She was crying. I was barely holding it together. Half the room was somewhere in between. The officiant said the words. We said ours back. And just like that, we were married. The reception was everything. Dancing and toasts and food and laughter rolling through the barn like weather. Marcus gave a speech that was 1/3 hilarious and 2/3 genuinely moving, and ended with him raising a glass and saying, "To Ethan, who bet on himself when no one else would, and who somehow also found a wife who's way out of his league. To Ethan and Claire." I laughed harder at that than I had in months. 2 hours in, as the dancing started and the light softened through the barn windows, I saw my parents standing near the edge of the room. They hadn't left. They were watching me. My father's hands were in his pockets. My mother's were folded in front of her. They looked like people who weren't sure if they had permission to be where they were standing. I excused myself from the conversation I was in. I walked across the barn floor toward them. Every step felt significant. Not heavy, significant. Like the difference between a door being locked and a door you're choosing whether to open. I stopped in front of them. My mother's eyes were wet. My father looked at me for a long moment, and then looked at the floor. Nobody said anything for a few seconds that felt much longer. And then my mother said, very quietly, "You look like your grandfather when he was young." I always forgot how much. Something in my chest cracked open just slightly at that. "Mom," I said. "I know," she said. Barely above a whisper, "I know." My father looked up. His jaw was tight in the way men's jaws get when they're holding something back that has weight to it. "I should have listened to you," he said. "When you said I should have listened." Not an apology with all the words in it, not a full accounting of everything that had broken, but something real. Something he had clearly been carrying to get out. I looked at my father, this man who had always seemed so certain of everything, who had built his life on surfaces and comfort in the path of least resistance, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. I saw that he was just a man, flawed and limited and shaped by his own blind spots. Not a villain, not cruel. Just someone who hadn't known how to love 2 children equally and had never been made to examine that until now. It didn't make it okay, but it made it something I could hold without it destroying me. "I'm glad you came," I said. And I meant it. My mother reached out and took my hand. She held it with both of hers. She squeezed once, tight, and then let go, and I saw her look across the room at Claire, who was dancing with her father. "She's wonderful," my mother said. "Yeah," I said. "She really is." I turned to find Natalie. She was standing a few feet behind my parents, slightly apart, like she wasn't sure she was allowed in the same group. She had her arms crossed, not in defiance, but in that way people hold themselves when they're bracing for something they're not sure they deserve. She had always been beautiful in the showy way. Tonight she just looked tired and honest. I walked over to her. She opened her mouth, and I could see the apology forming again, the rehearsed version this time, the one she'd prepared. "Natalie," I said, stopping her. She closed her mouth. "I'm not going to tell you it was fine, because it wasn't fine. What you did cost me years." Her eyes filled up immediately. "But I'm also not going to let it cost me today," I said. "You made one call. You told the truth when it mattered. That's not nothing." She pressed her lips together, trying to hold it together and failing. "I'm not ready to be your brother again," I said quietly. "Not tonight. Not yet. But I'm open to the possibility. Someday. And that's more than I had yesterday." She nodded, fast. Like she was afraid if she moved slowly, she would lose it entirely. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. That's enough." I nodded back. And then I walked back to my wife. Later that night, when the barn had emptied to just the closest few, and the string lights had become the main source of warmth, and Marcus had finally learned to correctly knot his tie only to untie it again, I stood on the edge of the vineyard with Claire beside me. The night was warm. The sky was enormous. The kind of sky you only really see when you're far enough from the city. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it for a real moment. "Like something is over," I said, "and something else is just starting." She turned her face up toward mine. "Good over? Or sad over?" "Both," I said. "I think that's how it's supposed to feel." She nodded slowly. "You were brave today." I had the right person standing next to me. She smiled against my shoulder, and we stayed like that for a while, not talking, just standing under that huge sky while the music played soft and low from somewhere behind us. And I thought about that 10-year-old boy with his solar system, standing in a kitchen nobody noticed him in, wanting so badly to be seen. I thought about everything that boy had survived, everything he'd built, not despite the rejection, but somehow, in some complicated way, through it. Because pain is a terrible teacher, but it teaches. Because people who learn early that they can't depend on others learn to depend on themselves. Because sometimes the families that fail us accidentally teach us what family actually means, so that when we find the real version, we recognize it immediately. I thought about my parents standing at the edge of the reception, uncertain and older and carrying things they should have set down a long time ago. I thought about Natalie and the cost of one lie told in a moment of pettiness that she'd had to live with for 6 years. I thought about Marcus and Priya and James and Claire's parents and everyone in that barn who had chosen to show up for me. And I thought about Claire, this woman beside me, who had looked at a man with a complicated history and a guarded heart and said, "I choose this. I choose you." Here's what I know now that I didn't know at 23. Standing alone in my apartment with a dead phone and an aching chest. The people who reject you do not determine your worth. They only reveal their own limits. I spent years believing that my family's inability to see me meant there was something wrong with me. Something missing. Some quality I lacked that, if I just found and fixed it, would make me lovable enough. Visible enough. Enough. It took 6 years and a wedding in a vineyard under the stars for me to understand what I should have been told from the beginning. You don't earn love by achieving things. You don't earn belonging by becoming impressive. Those things were never the entrance requirement to begin with. Anyone who made you believe otherwise was dealing with their own poverty of spirit. And that poverty was never yours to pay off. There are people in this world who will see you immediately, fully, without resume or proof or track record. Those are your people. Go toward them. Choose them hard. Build your life in the direction of that light. And the family that didn't see you, the rooms that felt cold, the dinners where your news was moved past quickly, the phone calls that went one-sided, the words that cut and were never taken back. You are allowed to grieve all of that. You are allowed to name it for what it was. You are allowed to stand in the honest truth of how it hurt, without shrinking it or excusing it. And then, if you're ready, and only if you're ready, you are allowed to put it down. Not for them. For you. Because some weights, no matter how long you've carried them, no longer belong in the life you're building. 7 words sent me away from a family that didn't know what they had. And 6 years later, on the most important day of my life, in a barn full of people who chose me, I was the one who decided whether to let them back in. That's the thing nobody tells you about being the one who gets left behind. Eventually, if you do the work, if you keep going, if you build something real, you become the one with the power. Not the power to punish, not the power to exclude the way they excluded you, the power to choose, to decide what your story means, to decide who gets to be part of the next chapter, to decide, quietly, privately, on your own terms, how much grace you have to offer, and to whom and when. That power doesn't come from money or success or a barn full of people applauding. It comes from surviving the thing that was supposed to break you, and finding out that you are still here, still standing, still building, still becoming. My name is Ethan Cole. 6 years ago, my parents told me not to come home. Last Saturday, I got married in a vineyard under a golden sky with everyone I love in the room. My parents were there. My sister told the truth. And I chose to leave the door open. Not because they deserved it. Because I did. If this story reached something in you, if you've ever been the one who was quietly set aside, overlooked, left out, or told you weren't wanted, I want you to hear this. The silence they gave you was never a verdict on your value. It was a confession of their limitations. You are not the sum of what they couldn't give you. You are the whole of what you chose to build instead. Keep building,